Hi, my name is Joanne Corey. This is my physical education lesson plan for EDSC 410. I chose to focus on lacrosse for 11th grade. I also chose this to be the second day of this unit, uh, where students will be working on passing and catching. I chose this because I just believed it worked a little bit better with incorporating language objectives into passing and catching versus cradling and scooping, which is what they would be working on the first day. So for uh, my content standards for physical education, I chose High School Course 1, Content Standards 1.2 and 1.5. 1.2 is really focusing on the students performing the skills in team activities, and Content Standard 1.5 focuses on them being able to explain the principles of biomechanics such as leverage, force, inertia, rotary motion, and opposition, and apply them to achieve advanced performance in team activities. So for the English language development standards, I really focused on three areas: collaborative, interpretive, and productive. So for collaborative, I want students to be able to exchange information and ideas with others through oral collaboration, discussion, and this would be mostly centered around the critical elements. For interpretive, I would want students to have to be able to analyze how to write and speak using vocabulary words and other language resources. For productive, this focuses on students being able to select and apply varied and precise vocabulary language structures to convey ideas. Um, so my content objectives are really focused more on the psychomotor aspect of this lesson, with being able to perform throwing and catching skills in lacrosse, but also to be able to explain the critical elements um, associated with those skills, and also having them to be able to explain how to apply the principle of leverage in order to increase velocity on the ball when performing a pass. So for language objectives, these are a little bit more specific in terms with what I want them to be able to do, um, as far as discussing the associated critical elements with pass, and perform them in a step-by-step progression through that explanation. And then I also want them to be able to play the role of the coach, the official, and the athlete. This means changing up their vocabulary based on their assigned role for that day. And then lastly, I want students to be able to describe the skill progression of a lacrosse pass using proper anatomy terms such as flexion and extension, which is in the vocabulary sheet that you'll see in a little bit. So for the intro to the lesson, before I really get into the start of the lesson, I really want to do an assessment of how well they remember everything from the previous lesson. Like I said, this is day 2 of lacrosse, so I'll start off by just a verbal assessment, asking my students to explain the critical elements of cradling and scooping, and then also ask them to demonstrate it without using any equipment so that I could see that they're able to perform them as well. And this is just giving me the okay that they're able to learn the new content. So here I'll be making any decisions if I have to reteach anything before moving on. And then next I have a YouTube video which really goes through the passing and catching progression in lacrosse. And this video explains these movements using some of the vocabulary uh, terms listed in my vocab sheet. So here I will do the same verbal check for understanding, and there'll also be a terms quiz, which I'll show you in a little bit. And the main purpose of this is to really get them ready for what they're about to do. So in the body of my lesson for the day. So in the body of my lesson, I will have students working in pairs. One student from each group will be given a list of vocab words in which they need to explain to their partners how to correctly throw a lacrosse ball and correct any errors that they're making using the provided list of vocabulary words. And the minimum of words that they'll have to use from the vocab sheet when explaining in this activity. So for each term, they need to have they need to use 5 of the vocab words, a minimum of 5. And this will really help me to see how well they're able to associate the vocabulary words to the actual movement of what they're to be doing. So the way they will explain is they'll be given a list of scenarios. For example, if one of the scenarios is having is that you have to explain how to your partner how they should pass the lacrosse ball, but with keeping in mind a passing lane, they'll use a minimum of 5 vocabulary words explaining how to pass, getting around that passing lane as well. And here I will model for the students what they really need to be doing. So I'll give them an example, and I'll be walking around helping any students who are struggling. And here I'll also be doing a visual assessment of how the students are doing. For my conclusion, it will be a formal assessment. So I have a rubric checklist that I'll also show you a little bit later with some of the key vocabulary words associated with both passing and catching. So I have 2 separate rubrics for each of those skills. And I will be grading this will help me grade their final activity. So they will also be given a quick write at the very end of the lesson as a homework assignment. And this is really more to assess their writing skills, and this is a formal assessment as well. And in this quick write, they need to describe the skills using the vocabulary words. So this form of assessment will help me as a teacher to see how well my class was able to learn the critical elements, and it also tells me if which students are ready to move on to the next skills, or if they need more practice with these previous ones. And for the formal assessment, I forgot to mention that when I am assessing them, it is an assessment of their physical ability to perform the skills, but on top of that, they're explaining what they're doing using those vocabulary words associated with it, and I will tell them which vocabulary words I'm looking for, so there's not really any ambiguity in what I'm looking for. All right. So moving on. So my adaptations for the lesson for English learners, I will provide many demonstrations along with cue words with a vocabulary sheet that will help them hopefully to understand the terms, and you'll see in a little bit that these cue sheets also have visual aids on that really show how to do each skill and what each cue sheet is really referring to. So for striving readers, again, I have the vocab sheet and then the cue sheets, as well as I have opportunities where they can orally explain the skill to their partners using the vocab list. For students with identified special needs, so I'll be using repetition, repeating a lot of the important information that I'm going over, and I'll also keep my class structured in the same way that I normally do, so I don't really want to stray too far away from the normal class routine, just because I know that a lot of students with special needs like knowing what they're walking into every day. And then again, I also have the visual aids and demonstrations, and they'll also receive a peer tutor if needed, and I'll also be working really closely with their special needs instructor if they have one as well. For advanced students, like I mentioned earlier, I will have stations. So if the students are really bored with the vocab sheet and only listing 5 of the vocab words, I'll encourage them to use more of the vocab words on the list, and then also to run their partners through more difficult scenarios for those who are more physically advanced as well. So here are the links for the videos. And then down here, let me go up. So here are the cue sheets. It's more of like a PowerPoint slide, and they each have images. So right here, this is talking about the lax box, and this image shows that it's right there, and then it explains where exactly to find it using those cues. Here's one for cradling, and this picture really shows the elbow and the wrist motion for cradling, and here are some of the cue words associated with it, and then bolded in each slide. If they go through any of the vocab words that I have on the sheet, it's all bolded for the students. Here's a hand placement chart as well that goes at the end of it, so they know how to grip the stick differently depending on what they're doing. And then down here, I believe it's the quiz next. Yes. So this quiz really incorporates a little bit of what happened in last lesson. Like the first question refers to cradling, which we went over in day 1, and then it also has some things that are in the video as well. And then here's the vocab sheet. This one's a little bit extensive, so they are given it for the entirety of the unit, and for this lesson specifically, I will highlight the specific terms that they can use for the situation, the scenarios that they're using for passing and throwing. And again, for those more advanced students, I'll encourage them to go outside the highlighted ones and use a little bit more. And then here are my assessments. So this one's for passing. And then down here I have in parentheses the vocab words that I'm really looking for. So elbow flexion, elbow extension, the follow through. And then down here I have the ones for catching. So the ask, that's one of the vocabulary words, as well as the head of the stick. That one's one of the vocabulary words. And then the lax box and flexion. As well as extension. And so those are all the handouts, and that's my presentation for my lacrosse lesson plan for physical education. Thank you.